Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of the podcast version of So This Happened, where we look at all the most important stories at the intersection of content, commerce, and technology. We've been doing So This Happened as a newsletter for just over a year, as hopefully many of you are aware, and we decided it was time to turn it into an audio medium, partly because we are both people who process this stuff by talking about it, and mostly just because we talk about this stuff all day long anyway, so we thought it was time to just hit record and share our thoughts with all you lovely listeners. We're going to start by introducing ourselves properly because I think many of our So This Happened readers never really learned who the faces behind the newsletter actually were. So, hello. I'm Jess Carlin. There we go. I'm Jess Carlin. I'm a partner at Atonic, and I'm also the co-host of the Early Adopter podcast, which is a podcast about AI for small businesses. And I will let Nathalie introduce herself.
Hi, so I'm Nathalie Curtis Lethbridge. I work with Jess at Atonic. I founded Atonic some time back when we were still in the early days of streaming. That shows you how far it's been around. Partly because of an obsession with the transformation process between content creation, tech, and monetization. And as this has evolved, and it really is a passion point of mine, it's a passion point of Jess's, we've come together to do this newsletter a year ago to try and explain the change. We realized that we were on this kind of incredible moment in history of this next wave of transformation, much like the internet 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And so it was a really good opportunity to document and discuss the foundational changes in all of this. So my background is I'm a lawyer by origin. I worked in senior management in the studios and launched huge amounts of services and one of the early veterans of the streaming services, and now advising on all different areas here and in the cultural and creative sector. So really thrilled, Jess, that we're actually getting to share our passion publicly with our faces rather than just because we sound a little kind of serious in the newsletter. And much as we have enjoyed doing the newsletter, it's not just about an academic recording of the change. It's really about thinking about the change in the context of the transformation of the economic models, the transformation of how content creators can actually monetize and build audiences, and the transformation for the audiences themselves in their control and what they can do with the content they're seeing. And of course, the big word that we're trying to avoid saying, but AI has obviously had a huge impact on all of this. So
it's very difficult to avoid that phrase, unfortunately.
The generic really AI term that covers billions of things. Yeah.
But I think also both of us are incredibly interested and passionate about innovation, particularly in the creative sectors as a whole. I mean, I was working on I'm going to date myself here, on the Sony e-reader before the Kindle was even a thing, like way back in the day. I worked on the launch of that. And then I guess I didn't really explain my background very well. I had a long career in film with a very short stint in music, which was not my favorite industry. Let's put it that way. And then I had a startup in the ad tech space, and I've spent the last probably about 5 or 6 years in kind of digital transformation and more on the heavier tech side of things. But I think both of us have real interest in emerging technology and innovation and everything that's coming down the pipeline. And I think one of the things that has been the most interesting for me about working on the newsletter in the first place is we really start to see trends over time, because we've been doing it for long enough at this point where you can really start to see things develop, which is super exciting and very interesting. And I think sometimes we are maybe a little bit too ahead of ourselves almost.
Well, it's interesting because the velocity of change is certainly, it's all going very quickly. There's a huge velocity of change.
Yeah.
The question is, which of that change is actually just noise and people taking what was a model 10, 20 years ago and just adapting it to the enhanced and speeded capabilities of AI, and which is really foundational change that is actually going to change the way that the business is structured and the monetization opportunities. And I think that's what we try to get to and try to figure out. We try to understand what's noise and what's actually foundational. We try and steer away from the big ticket items because we think that's well covered elsewhere. Thankfully, we've got lots of colleagues who are equally passionate and talking about it.
Exactly. Endless opinions. We don't need to add our noise
to
that.
So we try and focus on the things that people might have missed that we think are more than noise and actually are a reflection of either the testing of a new business model or the enablement of a platform or distribution capability that foundationally changes the way that things are going to work in the future for content creators.
And I should also say that we keep the definition of content very broad because so much is content now. It could be anything from YouTube and the creator economy all the way through to streaming, to film, to sports, anything, because gaming, because I think the definition of content is changing in itself and everything. And especially when it comes to the monetization and the commerce side of that content is changing so quickly. So we do keep that definition quite broad, which is why we have quite a wide range of things that we talk about. But I think personally, that is very exciting and interesting.
Yeah. So it's seated in passion for innovation, passion for an economic model that works for content creators and their right to be remunerated for their works and where they can build growth for their output, and a passion for the industry as a whole. All of that, and in my case, and I think Jess's case too, we're very based in London, and that has its impact because we're also focused on not just what's happening in the US and Asia, but also Europe. So it's a very international dimension to what we do.
Well, I also think that we specifically, in fact, obviously I am American, although I've lived over here for a long time, but I've gotten in trouble for talking too much about what's going on in the States because we do want to give a broad idea of what's happening globally, because often the Americans don't necessarily know about what's happening outside the US. And I can say that as an American.
And I can say that as the non-American in the piece. So I think we're trying to have a global perspective, and it's important because there are some philosophical differences in each region.
Also, there's a lot of stuff that often happens that, even, and we talk about this in his story today, but like Asia is very far ahead of the Western world when it comes to content and monetization. So sometimes looking to see what they're doing from a trend perspective is incredibly important, because then you can see what happens when, we see it a lot with Amazon and, Douyin or WeChat. You can see what Amazon's trying to do or what TikTok is trying to do based on, what's going on elsewhere around the world. So that is also one of the reasons why we tend to try and focus not just on what's happening in the US or even in Europe necessarily, but globally.
Yeah, so we like to follow the trends and really put them into context, so contextualize them, both based on our own personal experiences. And I hate to say it, I have a couple of decades of experience in launching content services and building content services and growing content services and growing tech reach of those content services. And you have the same, many less years, but nevertheless very important.
Kind.
And so it gives us a kind of an interesting perspective to dig in on. So it's not just about the new, it's about how the new fits into what works and what doesn't work and what's noise and what's not.
Well, I think on that note, that's probably a perfect segue into jumping into our first story. So the format for this will go quite closely to what we do with the newsletter. We will cover a story of interest. It might be several stories on a similar topic where we're kind of seeing a wider trend. We'll cover about 5 stories and we'll put the links to everything in the show notes. And we will also put in links to other stories that we're reading, because there are far too many stories for us to cover in just a short podcast.
Yeah, so just a quick set for those who like the newsletter format, you'll still get something to read, a catch-up cue sheet. But I think this is going to reflect more spontaneously on how the feeling is about the transformation and what it means globally. And I get very inspired by Jess and her perspective. So delighted to be talking rather than just writing.
Okay, let's get into our first story of the week. This is actually several stories because Netflix has had quite a few big announcements this week. We have found out that Netflix is in early discussion about always-on live TV genre-specific streams designed to run 24/7, which sounds familiar. It's also letting subscribers buy access to third-party services like Peacock directly through the Netflix platform, which is making it more of a distribution hub. And from the 3rd of August, we will have short-form video content from publishers such as Condé Nast, Hearst, Penske Media, which owns Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, Rolling Stone, and Billboard, alongside People, BuzzFeed Studios, and Tastemade. They will all sit within the Netflix app as content within its own right. This is all on top of the real push that Netflix is also making into creator and video podcasts. You know, they've got Jay Shetty now, they've got a new hot one. So what do we think is going on with Netflix? They've got quite a lot of big stories happening right now.
Yeah, so we did just say that we leave the big stories to the others, but this is too big to ignore. And actually,
well, it's a bunch of stories together. I think it's smaller stories rolling into one.
And it's a trend, which is interesting because it's not new, but it's new because it's Netflix. And what Netflix does do in this case is really look at things that have been tried and tested and not necessarily succeeded, take the logic of that and scale them Netflix style, which means scale them really well from a data aggregation point of view, from an integration point of view, from a tech point of view, and obviously scale them globally in terms of audience reach and audience ability to actually price that bundle and make it attractive. It is now moving from being a solo operator with a solo brand to being an aggregator. And this is the play that many others before have tried, but this is going to be at a much bigger scale, and it's already hit Europe as well.
Well, I think it's somewhat ironic that essentially what Netflix is creating here is cable TV. Everything comes in full circle.
It is the logic of cable TV. Yeah, it is the logic of cable TV. So let's step back and really try and understand what that means. There are a few things happening here. One is obviously the data piece. So building audiences from other audiences, taking audiences from niche services and taking them to Netflix, building a daily refresh capability through live channels, potentially, that they don't have at the moment. They really don't know how to deal with daily refresh. In fact, they're not very good at the refresh side of things.
Interestingly,
so this is forcing them to change that in an ad-funded world.
Yeah, and something that came out last week, which is a really interesting story, is that they're seeing a huge drop-off between the first season of their very popular shows and subsequent seasons. And part of that is their binge model, where everyone watches something in a weekend and then never thinks about it ever again. And that is probably somewhat to do with their marketing as well. But it's become a real problem for them. And I think this is probably based around trying to recapture that audience as well. As you were just saying, kind of keeping attention for a longer period of time.
Well, the key question is why is it important to them? ARPU. So they're now going to start thinking about ARPU and the impact of ARPU as people churn because of cost of living adjustments. People are having pain. Their marketing is really built on marketing tentpole brands in the first series and then marketing themselves as a repeatable subscription. Their marketing isn't built on a daily slew of activity and engagement from an audience. They're not yet built for live audiences. They're going to have a lot of learning to do. And so what have they done? They've gone and they've reached out to broadcasters and networks who actually understand those audiences, and they've partnered with them. And so what they're getting at that stage is they're getting all of the know-how of how to schedule and build for a daily audience and a daily engagement rate. And they've also moving much more towards the advertiser model, because that needs a daily refresh. That needs a reason to keep on being there. So it shows where they think the economics are going and where they think their growth is gonna.
What do you want to talk a little bit about TF1 and Netflix as well? Because I know that
that's
really
at Cannes Lions recently, I was on a session that we did with TF1, who had just done this deal with Netflix. It's an interesting deal. It was a deal to be distributed by Netflix in its entirety, including live sports, including all of its assets. TF1 is the French national broadcaster. It is significant. It is an ad machine, and it is selling its own inventory, and it's selling its own inventory exclusively on Netflix. So Netflix is not doing it for the ad sales piece, though I'm sure they get an interesting revenue share. It's doing it because it needs to have that discipline of having a broadcaster that is producing thousands of hours of content and able to schedule and change that content on a daily basis. This was the point that was made loud and clear to them. Why? They're doing it because they're scaling to a new audience. and they're getting access to Netflix's audience. Let's see what happens. That means that their advertisers are able to tap into that audience. And, there's certainly, I'm sure there's a demographic element about that because Netflix skews younger than the broadcasters. So there is some value. The data sharing is an interesting piece. There was a little bit of obfuscation and about what data was going to be shared where.
There was no way he was going to be able to talk about that on stage.
Well, I did scratch that a little bit longer afterwards, post facto, and I'm still going to go back and ask for more interesting details. It's a really interesting deal for me because it really is very much like the syndication deals that were done and that are still being done by the networks with the regional networks in the US. And certainly it's very significant because at the moment, I imagine the economics work. But if there is a dependency on that distribution network, then you ask yourself, the model isn't just about getting traction. It's about being able to charge syndication fees to distribute content on this extraordinarily far-reaching platform that is Netflix. So is Netflix going to become the El Dorado, basically aggregator of choice, the super cable provider or the super pay TV provider? It's interesting.
It sounds as well like with this Peacock deal, it sounds like that's even going to become the case. So for those of you who are in Europe and who are not aware, Peacock is NBC Universal's streaming platform, and it's probably the smaller of the US streamers. It's kind of holding its own, and I can say this as someone who used to work on Peacock, so I've got a little bit of affection for them. They're chugging along, but they're certainly not at the Netflix level of things.
No, but they've got great content and great sports.
Great content, exactly. And they've got sports. Exactly.
Sports.
So that, I'm sure that is their appeal for Netflix, for sure.
And daily scheduling.
And
relationships with the ad community that Netflix doesn't have,
I mean,
seasoned sales teams.
I can only dream of NBCU's ad sales team.
It matters. And it's the same thing in France. So the question that you have to ask yourself is this the redefining of the reach of the broadcasters outside of their legislated broadcasting license into a new sphere and arena that they'd hoped to do by themselves with the streamers, but via Netflix? There's been a place à prendre, as the French say, a place to take for some time amongst the streamers. And there's been a lot of speculation who's going to be the first to step up as an aggregated proposition. There's been lots of different attempts by people sharing data on audiences, building adoption and acquisition through different audiences. And the power of the aggregated streaming proposition has been there. And there's been, you've seen that a little bit in, some of the platforms for the fast channels, but this is the premium version of that. And so obviously Netflix has decided to play in that space and it's got enough weight to do it. The interesting thing for me, though, is what's going to be the reaction, because not everyone's going to love it. So are people going to be forced to join? In the UK, for instance, there are prominence rules that require public service broadcasters to be placed prominently on a kind of an EPG kind of scenario. How does that sit with the Netflix example? I mean, it's an interesting place, and I think it's one to watch. I know, we've heard in the UK as well that ITV and Sky are now joining forces for the ad market. At the end of the day, how is the TV ad market going to respond, the broadcaster market or the network market going to respond to this? And how are they going to protect their CPMs versus Netflix? TF1 says we are selling exclusively. We have exclusive control over our inventory. Phase 1, let's see what happens.
Well, there's one more thing I want to touch quickly on, because obviously we can talk about Netflix endlessly. They are such an interesting company. But just going back to this short form content quickly, because I think one of the things that is very interesting about the deals that were made with the likes of Condé Nast and Hearst, etc. Short form content is obviously very interesting, but I think a lot of these partnerships are geared towards shoppable content at some point in time. Condé Nast has all sorts of brands around like home and gardens and, that sort of thing, all of which just translate really nicely into product at some point in time. So I think let's just touch on that really briefly, because I think that is a very interesting thing that they're going to be looking at.
So short form content's another one that's been tried and tested many times. Quibi, anyone.
I think
and
even by Netflix themselves.
Yeah.
Everyone.
And, it's an obvious attempt to dominate the mobile side of things. And the mobile side of things is mobile audiences. And, we all know how we use our phones versus how we use the CTV or the main screen in your home. It has a much more direct nexus to transactional opportunities and transactional moments. We are all now used to using our thumbs to shop on our phones, right? Through content and content creation, through social platforms and others. So that behavior is already there. So I'm not surprised that Netflix is trying to get cash in on that through its short form content. Is it a stepping stone to shoppable or to transactional capability? I would have thought it would have to be, because you and I know we're both obsessed with this. We think there's going to be the next big wave of revenue stream. SVOD's now kind of gone on the curb. We've got the free ad-funded streaming, but obviously there's room for more. And that more is when content and commerce collide and people can track and deliver additional revenue streams and value through clicking through your content and actually purchasing.
Well, that actually segues really nicely into a story I was going to do a little bit later on, but I'm just going to jump straight ahead and talk about the fact that Google is piloting a new system in Southeast Asia that lets YouTube shopping ads send high-intent shoppers straight into the marketplace checkout flow with an e-commerce brand called Shopee. You may not have heard of Shopee. Yeah, a lot of people don't know about it. It's based in Singapore. It is the leading pan-regional e-commerce marketplace in Southeast Asia and Taiwan. It launched in 2015 and operates across Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, and Taiwan, plus select Latin America markets.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between
exactly.
Latin America and Asian markets.
In a nutshell, Shopee is essentially the Amazon equivalent in Southeast Asia, but they are particularly strong on social and video. So what's really interesting about this is that this is through Google's Commerce Media Suite. They launched it at Google Marketing Live last week. And the suite includes 3 key components. Commerce Media Suite, which links YouTube shopping ads directly to marketplace checkout pages, using real-time shopping insights to optimize who gets routed where and what they see.
Okay, so it's a direct click, is it?
It's a like direct, exactly.
It's not a direct click to the brands, it's a direct click
to the Shopee
platform
page. Exactly. Yeah. So you go from a YouTube ad directly through to Shopee.
So effectively, you are disintermediating the brand's own site.
Exactly. What I think this is quite similar to like what you would get on Amazon, but this is Google partnering with another platform, because obviously Google doesn't have that capability. This is only available on Shopee at the minute. There probably will be plans to roll it out to similar platforms globally at some point in time, although exactly what that looks like, who knows? There's also an affiliate partnerships boost, which lets Shopee take high-performing creator affiliate videos and amplify them as paid ads. So you're extending organic reach into scaled paid distribution. And then there is also a creator partnerships boost, which allows brands to promote creators' shoppable videos as ads within their own campaigns with a direct path to purchase rather than just awareness.
So that's interesting, because the key to that is path to purchase. And it's, we talked about it a lot at Cannes Lions, and everyone was starting to sort of see the light and talk about the intentional economy rather than the attention economy. It's moving from the attention economy to intention economy, which is a much more powerful thing, because it's taking the attention as a metrics and moving it to the outcome. So it's an outcome-based full loop, which is the golden holy grail of all of this. It has its pros and cons ultimately, but it is definitely the direction of travel. And it's definitely something that advertisers and content creators feel much more comfortable with, because on the basis of that, they can start to have solid metrics for growth, targeting, for funding, for all of that.
It really provides value to the creators, right? Like that came up a lot in Cannes as well, because there were just creators left, right, and center. It was impossible to avoid that.
And technically speaking and theoretically speaking, brands should love it. However, when you start to look at what this situation creates, it's actually potentially disintermediating brands. So there is a real risk here. There are some people who do content commerce who are all about click-through to the brand website. And there are others who do it who are brand amplification tools, and then it's the brands themselves that then take the orders and move on. This is completely disintermediating the brands, much like another big platform that we know, American in nature, does the same. It becomes a walled garden of both data and procurement.
Well, this is also one of the reasons why instant checkout, which was OpenAI's checkout within the OpenAI conversational chat, this is why it failed. When they launched it at the end of last year, it was kind of around for a couple of months, but the brands didn't like the fact that they were disintermediated. God, I really struggle with this word. Disintermediated.
Disintermediated,
Yes, there we go. Absolutely. I can say it properly. But your whole brand website is just completely pointless because you're just purchasing directly.
But who carries the inventory risk then?
Yeah.
If they're disintermediating the brands, are they still asking the brands to carry the inventory risk and then just paying the brands for whatever is procured or bought or sold? That's an interesting question. I mean, I think the big question is, are the brands just going to allow themselves not to be part of the
they certainly
data value change?
Yeah, they didn't with OpenAI. They pushed back and now they've got apps within ChatGPT which pushes out to the brand website. So they have taken back that control.
And the bigger question from a structural point of view is it's moving from platform to marketplace, which is where a lot of things are going. And that is, I think, the big radical change for AI in terms of content. You're no longer just talking about distribution, you're talking about building marketplaces through that distribution. And I think this is something that we're just starting to tap into now, but obviously Google being Google have completely cottoned onto it, and they've seen what Amazon's done with that. It's certainly been the Amazon model for a long time.
Sure has.
But it is, this is happening now. There's already agentic commerce on that's happening. This is only going to be sort of solidified as we build models that are self-serving through agentic frameworks. So it's really important to pay close attention to this. And if you're a brand, to really, or a publisher for that matter, to really stake your claim here and monitor this carefully, because you don't want to be in a situation where you are no longer in control of your data, or where you have to pay for access to the platform that's going to give you the ability to get into that marketplace and sell.
Well, and like I said, this is only available in Singapore and the Southeast Asia market for the time being. But watch this space, because I think this is probably something that if they can roll out globally, they absolutely will.
But it means that they're going after Amazon's turf too, which is good. We want competition.
Yeah, no, we do want competition.
Ideally, competition that's not just from the same nationality and the same territory. So we want Asia. They've got competition as well. But we want to build multiple platforms, and we want to see people compete for those platforms. But again, be careful if you're a brand about how you structure your relationship with these commerce platforms, because you do not want to be disintermediated from your data flow and from your relationship with your customer.
Right. Our next story. So after multiple rounds of bankruptcy and acquisition by a private equity firm, accessories brick and mortar company Claire's, I'm sure everyone remembers going to get their ears pierced at Claire's back in the day. I think I have my second earrings that I got done at Claire's. They are betting on their comeback via a phygital creator partnership. So for those of you who don't know, phygital is physical and digital combined. They are betting that on a creator partnership via Roblox.
Can we do a little sign saying phygital? Ding! It's a new, because there are so many acronyms that are being invented right as we speak, I think. But phygital is a great one.
Phygital is a great one. So Claire's have partnered with Lana's Life, which is a 9.5 million subscriber Roblox creator known for a game called Dress to Impress. This is a game that has been played over 10 billion times. These numbers are just mind-boggling. When you don't deal with Roblox on a day-to-day basis and you hear these numbers, they're just absolutely insane. So what they've done is they've created a 45 product line. This covers everything from beauty, accessories, collectibles, all kind of very reasonably priced. And the first 8,000 in-store customers who buy a Lana's Life item receive a complimentary exclusive Roblox avatar item. And it also includes an in-person meet and greet with Lana and a digital extension inside Roblox itself. So basically, you buy something physical at one of the Claire's stores, and then you get something in Roblox as well, like a digital asset within Roblox as well.
So let's ask ourselves what's in it for Claire and what's in it for both sides, actually. And you said there's eight. How many? What's the number?
So there's only 8,000.
8,000.
So it's
the number is very limited, right?
Items. The number is very limited. Yeah, this is not huge.
Because my first instinct was, oh, that's really interesting. You've got a bricks and mortars company that's mastered all of the procurement and building and selling of accessories, and it wants to create a bigger marketplace for itself. So it's basically white labeling what it does to a creator. But this is not what it is, because the numbers are too small, 8,000. So then the next thing you go and think about is, so what are they trying to achieve? They're trying to reach a new audience because they can't traditionally read it. So Claire's, when it first launched, was really about accessories, not necessarily for fully flown adults, but for young girls. And it seems to have lost its way with that audience. So
it has very much lost its way.
To reconnect with that audience in some way, do you think? Is that the driving force for Claire?
Well, interestingly, I actually did look into the demographics of Lana's life visitors. So obviously Roblox itself tends to skew a little bit younger. 63% of Dress to Impress users are age 13 plus. 43% are over 18. Which is really, really interesting. So it is obviously very much a Gen Z, Gen Z, Gen Alpha audience. But that, I believe, is exactly who Claire's is trying to reach. They've really struggled over the last couple of years. They've gone from something like 1,500 stores in North America. They are now down to 900. So they've closed quite a lot of stores, and they've obviously gone into bankruptcy.
But maybe this is the stepping stone to building a more visible digital e-commerce business.
Yeah.
They realize that they need to build their audience for the e-commerce business. So they're reaching out to the right places and doing deals so they can bring people ultimately to a digital storefront that they can then purchase from. So
I think
it's an acquisition cost for them building this new incarnation of themselves.
I think they're also so keen to get people back into their existing brick and mortar stores as well. They're really looking at this as a feedback loop. So obviously the digital engagement drives store visits and vice versa. They're looking at it from a loyalty perspective because the avatar items are sticky and repeatable. And they're also looking at it as a discovery engine because fans see the brand in games and videos. So obviously there's only 8,000 in-person items or in-person store visits that you can have, but that's certainly going to help from a brand perspective to remind people that Claire's even exists in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Roblox is fascinating anyway. And this whole phenomena, you remember that we saw at the innovation forum that we went to in Alicante that there was a presentation on the future of how people relate, and creating worlds was where everything was going, right? So Roblox is absolutely a testament to that. And if that's the case, then for brands and for storytelling, being part of those worlds and being able to be adopted by those worlds is important. And it'll be interesting to see what happens and how much Roblox does these sorts of deals in the future too, because their audience is incredibly valuable, individualistic. They want to build their own thing, but they want to actually have communities around it. So it's quite interesting to see where that goes.
Okay, let's move on to our next story, which I know is probably going to be one that you are very excited to talk about. So I'm going to let you really lead the way on this conversation because you feel very strongly about this. This story is about Europe's attempt to reclaim strategic control over digital payments by launching a public pan-European digital currency. So this is the concept of a digital euro. So obviously you have very strong feelings about sovereignty, particularly payment sovereignty. A lot of this is around reducing reliance on US-based currency, US-based payment methods. Do you want to go into this one a little bit?
I think it's not just about reducing payment methods. It's about where the flow of money is. So when you're talking about payment for content and content creation and European content, you're talking about very large-scale payaways, which are basically flowing back into the US and not being reinvested in European content. So
I think that is something
Google,
that is, people don't talk about that aspect of it enough when you talk about the money for content. I think people don't
look at
focus
the money
on the
flow.
fact.
And the money flow is because the distribution infrastructure allows for a one-way flow back to the US. It's not, and that includes, by the way, the conversation on Netflix too. If you're going to be TF1 distributed on Netflix and you're getting some ad revenue, be aware that you're at some stage you're paying for the benefit of that distribution. But if you're on YouTube and you're being carried by YouTube, YouTube's going to get a good chunk of that money and flow it back to the US. It's not going to be reinvested in original European content. It's going to be reinvested in whatever YouTube or Google chooses to reinvest it in. So you're not in control of that. It's not coming back into the European economy. There are also some bigger ticket items in relation to European sovereignty, which has to do with payment mechanisms that take 1 to 2 to 3% of takings. And again, the money flows back to the US. It doesn't flow into Europe. So at the moment, there is a very big movement in Europe and in the UK to really think about the infrastructure around all of these. And obviously, payment systems are infrastructure. They're foundational infrastructure. They impact the flow of cash, and they impact where that money sits and goes to, and the data that's controlled by that, which is humongous. So I think, it is legitimate to be looking at certain structural issues in Europe that need to be fixed. So there's a number of initiatives at the European level. We could do a whole program on this, to be honest.
Maybe we should.
And this is just the latest one.
Yeah.
Everything from how you set up a company in Europe, which is a
we covered that.
To everything else.
Yeah, we covered that a couple months ago, I believe. What was it? Europe Inc. or something like that?
Europe Inc. is a one system registration for European companies. It's still going through the process, and it's not perfect, but it's an attempt to try and simplify the registration process. In the UK, of course, you have a very simple registration process. You register your company, next day you're up and running. And, in the US, you do have a federated process, but some states are easier than others and create, a lot of...
Shout out to everyone who's registered in Delaware.
So Delaware LLC is the example. So the Europe's attempt to create a Delaware LLC in Europe is called Europe Inc. This is a slightly different thing. This is looking at the payment mechanism itself, which is absolutely appropriate. And, France, for instance, is also looking at its own LLM and other systems. There's a lot of talk about sovereign stacks, and there's talks about all sorts of aspects of all of that. So that's a very strong conversation that's happening with governments backing and initiating this. And certainly the EU has been very quick to legislate on all of this and try and bring out systems. But it's not simple. You've got 28 countries that you're trying to get together.
This is the trickiest part. And I know that this is something that's come up in a lot of the events that you and I have been to in the last 12 months is the difficulty. And I think also, like, if we look at purely just from an infrastructure and payment rails perspective, this is an attempt to simplify cross-border payments as well. And just kind of, just as we've been saying, just generally kind of reduce the friction, essentially.
I think reducing friction in Europe would be a very good thing, and they're very aware of the need to do that. That's what creates competitiveness. And they are very concerned about the level of competitiveness in relation to Asia and in the US, particularly as things are moving very fast and changing very fast. That being said, it is a very important topic, and it's not going to go away. I think the value loss is starting to dawn on people of having just given away the right to control certain rails. And so you talked about rails, and this is a very seminal time in history. We are building the rail for the next wave of industrial revolution. And therefore, we need to make sure that those rails are equitable, that they build for a competitive environment where whether it's Asia and individual countries in Asia, whether it's Europe, whether it's Latin America, it should not be dominated by one country's behest. And I think if we're learning anything in the last year and a half since we've had a change of regime in the US, it's that we need to be much more thoughtful and intentional about making sure that there is open competitiveness in the building of those rails and that infrastructure.
Right. Let's move on to our final story of our first podcast edition of So This Happened.
Number one.
Number one of many, hopefully.
Yeah.
Our final story is that PlayStation is launching a fast channel that sits within its gaming and entertainment ecosystem. So basically, this is turning its existing and licensed content into a 24/7 linear ad-supported stream. So I know you've got a lot of experience with fast channels. This is not the first time that Sony has attempted this, but I think from an advertising infrastructure perspective, it's probably a little bit better placed now than it was when it attempted it in previous years.
Yeah, I think the fast monetization model is still being tested, but in the US, certainly it's been successful for some people. And it favors well-loved content. It's proven to be a place where archives can make money and build revenue.
So the content that they're looking at using for this is content like esports games. They're looking at documentaries, animation, kind of anything within and things that relate to the gaming ecosystem that they know their audience of gamers is going to like. So as you were just saying, it's if you've got archival content or library content, this is a really interesting way of looking at repurposing that.
Yeah, I don't think it's just repurposing too. I actually am the firm belief that because of the amount of slop that's coming through our content channels and funnels at the moment, authentic content, trusted content, brands that you are aware with, brands that have sort of an emotional resonance because you've experienced them in your use of entertainment tools in the last 15, 20 years, will start to develop a premium because they are distinct from the slot that we're seeing. AI-generated content is AI-generated content.
Yeah.
Already when you go on social feeds, you can see that such a high proportion of that content is already AI generated, and you know it straight away. And so the connection to archive content becomes stronger. So with AI enabling your ability to use that archive content, seed it, develop it, grow it, and make programs from it, what's not to like about taking it out and making it available to audiences that really connect with it in an authentic way? And I think this is what they're trying to do with this.
I think one thing that I just found particularly interesting about this story is that it's kind of non-traditional media. It's gaming. It just isn't the first thing that you think of when you think of a fast having the Disneys of the world or even a sports channel or whatever. That, for me, makes a lot of sense. I think the gaming aspect of this really stood out to me because it's just a different audience.
Let's go back to how we started this whole podcast. We talked about engagement, right?
Yeah.
In the context of Netflix. So gaming is one of the most engaging forms of entertainment,
sure
right?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
So if you are a gamer and that you have developed a relationship with a particular piece of content, you have that tie. You are going to be thrilled to be able to watch something around that. Now,
I don't know if you knew this about me, but I'm a big gamer. Did you know that?
I didn't know how much. I suspected it because I was like, she's excited about this. It's a
running joke with I have my Switch. I am a dedicated.
I know you talk about it.
Yeah, I'm a dedicated Nintendo fan. But it's kind of gotten to the point where if I can't find a new game, I will go back to my tried and true games. I've got about 3 that I play on repeat.
You see?
Well, this is why I mention it, because it is directly relevant to this. For me, my comfort game is Zelda. I will always go back to Zelda. I have played it so many times. 90% of the time at this point, I don't even play the main game.
You don't have a Sony game you can quote me there that you
Sadly, I don't. I am a
that would be the perfect segue.
I know. Damn it. No, I'm a strictly a Nintendo girl. But I can run around Zelda, like Hyrule, which is the Zelda kingdom. I can run around there for literally weeks on end. I'm not playing the game. I'm just doing all the side quests, or I'm just discovering. I don't even know how many hours I've logged in that game at this point. It's great for long travel as well, because I do a lot of long haul flights and things. But yeah, when you talk about, people being interested in content around their favorite game, this is exactly what we're talking about. And that's one of the reasons why I thought this was such an interesting
and it is
move from Sony. Yeah, completely.
Because it's taking someone like you and pulling them in a world that's being overwhelmed by all of this AI generated content and saying, this is the stuff I really like. I really understand why I would engage with it. Bringing you back into those moments that are special to you, that you feel are genuine, authentic, and resonate with you. I think this is where we're going to see archived content. And it's great that it's gaming content because it's very important content in terms of people's relationships with that content and history with that content. We're going to see a lot more of that.
History is a really interesting word for you to use, actually, because I think that's a really good point. A lot of people at this point have been gaming for 30 plus years. I've got a friend who, there's a bar that we go to in Brooklyn that has the old school pinball, it's got pinball machines, but it's also got old school console games. It's so much fun. But he still plays games at that bar that he played when he was 9 years old, and so for him, yeah, he's got that history. So for him, he plays Mortal Kombat. He played Mortal Kombat back in the day. He still plays it now.
So if you had a fast channel of Mortal Kombat,
he would probably
with a discussion
room
around it.
Yeah,
there's your audience.
There's your audience.
That would be a deep connection.
Yeah. So anyway, just a really interesting story from a gaming perspective because it's not one that you hear about often. So,
well spotted.
Right. I think that is plenty for today. As always, we've managed to talk endlessly about this stuff. So we promise going forward they won't be.
Jess.
I was going to say they won't be quite as long going forward. One can only hope. But thank you so much for listening to our first episode of So This Happened. We can't wait for future episodes. And Nathalie, it's been a joy chatting about this stuff as always.
This is what we do. But can I just suggest, please do feedback if you have any comments or anything that you think we should talk about. This is kind of something we're doing for us and for you.
Yep.
Because we're passionate about this space. So please,
and you can find us on
feedback.
LinkedIn. We are Atonik, ATONIK. And we'll make sure that we put all of our contact info in the show notes as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Bye.